Welcome back to the College Cinephile. Today we will be reviewing Ready Player One, otherwise known as Nerdgasm, the movie. Directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Ty Sheridan and Olivia Cooke. Has Steven Spielberg finally come back from his stream of lackluster movies? I'm Sydney Hatfield, and with me to discuss the movie is Dr. Destiny. So, Dr. Destiny, what did you think?
I will say this is the nerdiest movie I have ever seen in the best way.
Exactly.
I loved every minute of this movie. It's like you've seen from the trailers, it's like the Oasis. It's a immersive world where anything and anything can happen, and it's just great seeing like everything in pop culture basically just thrown on the screen. Like you see in the trailers in the final battle, like all these crazy characters. It's just really awesome. And with that in mind, I will admit that I did have some concern going in whether or not the references were going to be too much and like weigh down the movie. But for me, I actually didn't have a problem with it. Yes, there is a lot, but man, it was just really cool. Like I loved it, especially the opening race where it's like you got all these different cars from like pop culture. You got the 1966 Batman, the Back to the Future DeLorean, the Bigfoot monster truck, the Akira motorbike, and it's just really cool. Like you see them going through everything, and it's like, yeah, the little kid in me like was brought back to life through this movie. Like seeing the T-Rex and King Kong. I can go on and on about how much of my childhood loved this movie, but yeah, I freaking love this movie.
I agree. Like, I had the same concern, especially because, like, I think most of that was from the trailers, because, like, the trailers kind of like showed off, like, look, this is what's in the movie. These are all the references. Like, we're so, like, look at the 80s, you know? Mm-hmm. But I didn't, when I was watching the movie, I didn't find that there was too many references. Mm-hmm. I feel like most of them had a place, and, like, it wasn't, you know, out of left field. Like, most of them had a purpose for being in the movie. I did really enjoy this movie. Kind of like the only thing for me is so like, this takes place in 2045. And the whole time I'm watching this, I'm just thinking like, it's 2045, why are people still obsessed with the 80s? You know, like I understand now why people are obsessed with the 80s. You know, I say obsessed, but like, you know, it's because like, you know, when you're a kid and like you're absorbing all this content, and then like you tend to replicate in a way sort of that content when you're the content creator. So that makes sense for our modern day, but it's 2045 and the 80s is still very prominent. And so I'm kind of thinking like, did no one ever like grow past the 80s, you know? Just the entire time I'm watching this.
Yeah. Well, I know we were talking about this a little bit after we saw the movie. I think, for me, one of the reasons why the 80s decade stands out in human, like, society and culture is because it was a very nostalgic and very, like, happy time. And if you look, like, at the years leading up to that, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, those were some pretty dark times. You had... you know, the Jim Crow laws, segregation, the Vietnam War, the Korean War. It was just, and you know, going into the 80s, like, it just felt like an uplifting time. Yeah, the 80s were still, like, there's still bad stuff that happened, but it was uplifting. Now, going into, like, the film, how it's like, how come, like, there's so much 80s in the world? The way I see that is because we get the narration in the beginning, which I'll talk about in a bit, the narration, but we see how... it's not just an 80s world. It's not Oasis, the 80s, like VR. It's a whole bunch of worlds. There's like a vacation world and a gambling world and whatnot. And so the characters that we get introduced to, the characters that drive this story are like 80s enthusiasts. So that's why we see so much 80s in this world, because we're following down their path. And also you have like the treasure hunters, I think they're called the Gunters?
Yeah, the Gunters.
Yeah. Got that right. Yeah, and so like the creator of this game, like he created everything, but like the part that he loved and the part that a lot of people love are the 80s, and that's why we follow that the most, I think, is because that's what the main characters are like so enthralled with, and as also the Gunters as well. though there's still other worlds and other stuff to do, you know, that's what we're following because that's what the story is.
And like I 100% like see where you're coming from, but I feel like I would buy it more if like, you know, part of the reason why the 80s decade has been so prominent in my life is because of like my parents. And so if it's 2045, obviously his parents, but really, you know, it's his aunt, he's been raised by his aunt. She wouldn't have grown up in the 80s. She would have probably grown up right now, you know. So, I mean, I understand that like he's obsessed with this one guy and this guy. He loved the 80s, but like I understand that, but I don't 100% buy it. Like, I would have liked to see like, what do they think music would have been in 2045? Like, why don't we ever see the content that was made in 2045? You know, it's all just from the 80s. And the thing is, it's because the people who made this movie, they grew up in the 80s, you know? Like the writer of the book, he was a kid in the 80s. And like that's really why there's so much 80s references in this movie as opposed to anything else.
I can see where you're coming from, and that your argument, and that like, okay, like what you said, like the 80s was prominent in your life because of parents. I think for the main character's sake, the reason why would 80s be prominent, like he was raised by his aunt, and clearly his aunt wasn't influenced by the 80s. Well, we learn from the main character that he's an orphan. Both of his parents died very young. And that he's raised by an aunt who, like, we learn throughout the movie that it's kind of like a dysfunctional family. And so the creator of the Oasis, that's this main character's father figure. Like, heck, we see in his van that he's got set up where he goes into the Oasis. He's got newspaper clippings of this guy's life. He knows everything about his life, his favorite restaurant, like what happened on his date and stuff. And so I feel like the creator of the Oasis became his father figure, and so that's why he's so connected to the 80s, in my opinion.
Isn't kind of a large part of the reason why he grew this connection with this guy is because after he died, he was like, you want like all of my money and stuff? Like you want to own the Oasis? You know, it's this competition. And so people to get the clues to learn how to, or, you know, to get these keys to win the Oasis, like you have to know everything about this guy. And I feel like people would have been like, oh, like, yeah, that's a cool dude. He like created my escape. But then like that they probably more likely, I would think, tried to learn everything about this guy when he died 5 years prior to when the movie started.
I don't think...
Because otherwise, why would you? You know?
Right.
I mean, yeah, like this guy's like, he created the Oasis, and like, I can see how you'd be like, yeah, this guy's dope, like, I'll follow him. But like, otherwise, like, I don't see it. I just don't, like...
Yes, the center of the story is this competition with the three, finding the 3 keys to get the major Easter egg and to own the Oasis. If I remember correctly, we don't see much of the main character's life before the competition starts. So yes, I can see where you're coming from, but personally, I feel the way they've set up his character that he didn't become enthralled with 80s pop culture and the creator just because of the competition. I think that he's always loved it. And so that's why I feel that, yeah, that's why like the 80s is so prominent in this story, because again, we're following his story because he's always loved it ever since he's grown up, not because of the competition. That's the way I see it. But
a few moments later.
Moving on, I guess.
Yeah,
like we'll push
let's
it.
finally move on.
Another one of my favorite parts of this movie was the villain, Ben Mendelsohn. He did a fantastic job of playing the corporate douche, and like I think they did a really good job of telling a very relevant story, because these corporate people are trying to get the Easter egg so they can take over the Oasis and throw in ads and in-game purchases, which is a very prominent issue in the video game world right now, and even the technology world, where like the FCC, they recently like took off the ban on all that stuff. I think if I'm remembering my politics correctly, I don't know, I'm not a politician.
Like they reverse net neutrality.
Yeah, that. Well, so like I feel this story is gonna speak to a lot of people, not just hardcore nerds of video games and comic books and movies, but just like anybody who's been touched by nerd pop culture and the internet and all that stuff. And it was really good to see Spielberg back at the way he used to be. I do agree that his recent strain of movies have been okay. And it was really good to see classic Spielberg again doing what he does best. And my thing that like solidified him being back is that the music, like he does a lot of like, I guess like nostalgia feeling music when there's like tender moments, or like at the ending, which we won't spoil, but at the ending it's a very like uplifting kind of like music. He does that a lot, and it was good to see that again in one of his movies. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Jumping back to the villain of the movie, I kind of like how you can tell who the bad guy is in the Oasis because he still has a suit.
Yeah. His VR character has like a tux and everything.
The weird thing about the villain is, so like it's this corporation, and it's not like a government entity.
Right.
It's just this corporation. But like they're debt collectors.
Yeah.
Not to like spoil too much, but like they're debt collectors, and like that's kind of wild to me. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, how is that legal? Like, I understand that like this is almost a post-apocalyptic, but like not really world, but like.
Yeah, like
for real?
I agree with you. If I had to take the side of defending it, the only defense that I would give is that in the beginning he talks about how the world has like been having a series of like unfortunate events with like something with like glucose, I think, or I don't remember the details, but a whole bunch of like series of events who have like made this world like really cruddy. Heck, to make cheaper housing, they stack trailers on top of each other, which is not very safe.
Yeah.
And so
there's a whole video about that.
Yeah.
that we both watched.
Yeah, and so I guess like because like the world is like not what it used to be, and like it's almost like the Great Depression, but we have VR and escapism. And so I feel like, I guess that's the reason why it could be legal, but at the same time,
I don't buy
American
it.
values
I really don't
and
buy
stuff,
it.
yeah,
like I'm not 100% like sold on this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Because like I understand that there's like all these series of crises, but honestly, we're always in a series of crises.
Yeah.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
But like I feel like I'm bashing on this movie, but honestly, I really did enjoy it. I would highly recommend it to anyone who's, any kind of nerd.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and for me, my issues are just like tiny nitpicks. Like, I guess one that I'll go over is just in the beginning when he's narrating. It's just that, like, I felt like that didn't need to be there.
Right.
Like, I get for us to know his story, but the part where he talks about the Oasis, you can know what you are and everything. We see that already, like, people, like some people have the VR set in boxing or like pole dancing or whatnot. We didn't really need the narration. And that's just a nitpick. I freaking love this movie. That's the takeaway.
I mean, they say in like our writing classes that like, or in our film classes that like narration is a cheat.
Yeah, show don't tell.
Exactly. But like I can get past it as well.
Same.
I think overall our consensus is that we had a really good time with this movie and we liked it a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we really have to say. So thanks for joining our debate and movie review. And we'll see you next time on the College Cinephile. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment, tell us how much you loved it, because, it was great, yeah. We'll see you next time on the College Cinephile. Bye.
Wreck 'em Tech.
Wreck 'em Tech.